So now that we have our error handling middleware, let's go ahead and add this into our startup class so that we can actually make use of this. So I'm just going to open up the startup.cs class. And as mentioned, any error handling middleware that we add needs to come very early in the pipeline. So what we have currently as our exception handling middleware is this call to use our developer exception page. But I'm actually going to comment this out so that we use our own exception handling middleware for every exception, whether we're running in development mode or if we're running in production mode. Now, if we want the detailed debug information from what we were getting inside here, we can always come back into our terminal and take a look at what's going on inside here to get the full details of the exception. So please remember that, because if you're going to get a 500 internal server error and you're not getting a lot of information, then please come back into the terminal to take a look and see what's going on. It'll even give you the line of code that caused the exception for you to go and investigate. So what we're going to do, now we've commented this out, is we're going to add our new middleware to this. And what we can do is say app.useMiddleware, and then we specify the type, which is going to be our error handling middleware. And we'll also just need to bring in our API middleware into our startup class. So now we have this in place, what we're going to do now is go across to our delete handler so we can make use of this. Let's open up this. And what we'll do, instead of throwing a new exception, what we'll do, if we can't find an activity, what we'll do is throw a REST exception. And we'll need to bring this in from application errors. And what we also need to pass to this is an HTTP status code. And we'll need to bring in system.net. And we'll use the not found status code. And then what we can do is pass in a new object and say new. And in here we can just say activity equals not found. And if we save this and we go back to Postman, and let's take a look at what we get back now when we attempt to delete that activity. And we were getting just a 500 internal server error before, but what we should see now is we get a 404 not found response. And we get our error object inside here as well that tells us what it can't find. So even though we're throwing exceptions, we're still sending back the correct HTTP responses. The only downside to this approach is it does take a little bit more effort inside our handlers to add the logic to check to see where we're likely to get an error and respond accordingly. We'll still keep our exception down here to say there's a problem saving changes, rather than make this a REST exception. And we'll just use REST exceptions to try and capture the likely errors that we're going to get, certainly in terms of things like not finding a resource in the database. But like I mentioned earlier, these should still be exceptional rather than just the normal flow of our application. And we'll see them whilst we're testing, but in theory, via our client's application, our users should not see these very often. Unless they're misbehaving, then of course they're going to see them. So we've got that in our delete command. There's a few other places we need to adjust this as well. And inside our details handler, we should also check to see that we've got an activity before we return this. So let's just copy this check to see if we have an activity, and I'll just paste this inside my details request. And we just need to bring in the application errors and also the HTTP status code from system.net. And that should be fine. And the other place we need to check to see if we have an activity, and I'll just copy this and paste it into the edit activity. We also want to replace this with our new REST exception as well. And I'll just bring in the application errors and also the system.net. So now we've got the ability to handle errors in our API. What we also need to take a look at is the errors on the client side and what we're doing with them. And we'll take a look at that next.